Hello and welcome to another episode of Devs on Tape. So you might be curious, this is the first episode of Devs on Tape which is in English. So we try our best, Caro.
Yeah.
We'll see. And we have a pretty good guest. You might have seen it in the title of the podcast, and we have plenty of topics to talk about. Yeah, welcome. Ladies first. Hi, Caro. How are you
Hi,
doing?
Kai.
How are you doing?
I'm fine.
Great. So we have a very nice guest from Australia here in our podcast studio at Dork. Yes, welcome, Connor McDonald. Glad you're here.
Welcome.
It's great to be here. My first ever DOAG. I did virtual DOAG last year, but I won't say how many years I've been using Oracle, but in all that time, I never ever managed to get to a DOAG.
So the biggest conference, right, in Germany for Oracle software, and now you go trying the best in the first DOAG after Corona, right?
Exactly, and I'm absolutely thrilled to be here. And it's one of those things where I always wanted to get to DOAG, but I used to live in the UK many, many years ago, and the two conferences used to be very close together. And I always felt sort of a loyalty aspect to go to the UK OG, and then whoever I was working for would say, well, we're not paying for you to go to DOAG. And so it was always unfortunate because everyone used to come back and say, oh, you've got to go to DOAG. You know, it was so nicely run and well organized, etc. And I always thought, one day we'll get back to DOAG, and it just never happened. And then, 25 years later, I finally got here.
And finally at Devs on Tape, right? Yeah. So the right opportunity, and we
that was the thing that's what tipped me over the edge when I knew I could get on Devs on Tape.
Great. So let's do a little rewind, and maybe you can just introduce yourself for every listener who might not know you. I don't know if there's anyone, but in case there's someone who doesn't know you, maybe you can just give us an introduction.
Sure. My name's Connor McDonald. I was born in Perth, Australia, and work out of Oracle in Perth, Australia. Have spent some time overseas, but my job at Oracle, officially, I think inside the Oracle HR system, says I'm a database advocate. In terms of the actual remit of my job, what I'm meant to do is effectively, my focus is solely on, and it sounds cliched, but customer success. And that is, it's very easy to go by any product, whether it's from Oracle, Microsoft, whatever. You get it home, you get it on your workplace, and you start running it. And it's probably just going to work, but is it working as well as it could? And so that's where the customer success thing comes in. My job is to help customers get the absolute most out of Oracle, because let's be honest, if you're using some of the Oracle products, they're not cheap. And so my definition of cheap is it feels expensive if you're not getting the value you should from it. So my official job title is customer success. And part of that is going to conferences around the world. A lot of it in Australia is going to customers and just literally sitting with them and saying, how can we make things better if things aren't going well? Or even if things are going well, how can we squeeze more out of that investment you're making? So that's pretty much my job. It's a really flexible job. I have a lot of autonomy. It's just about making sure customers are happy with their Oracle landscape, which is, I love doing this job.
Yeah,
So
it sounds really great.
This might have been my next question. So if you're saying you're sitting together with the customers, why are you still living in Australia? Because it's the most farthest part of the world to travel to customers all over the world, right? So maybe in Corona times remotely, but how does this work?
Well, I really can't explain the enjoyment I get from sitting in row 38 triple D on the back of a plane for 16 hours. That's the real highlight.
Oh yeah, great.
But no, seriously, one of the things that made me work out of Australia, besides being born there, is I spent a lot of time in Europe and the UK back in the late 90s, early 2000s. And my partner at the time, we were planning on having children. And we caught up with some English friends, and they had a toddler about 2 years old. And we went out in the sunshine once, and we're playing in the park, and this toddler was just screaming. And we couldn't work out why. And eventually our friend said to us, it's the first time I think she's been on grass. And at which point I thought, as much as I love living in Europe and the UK, if I'm going to raise children, I'm going home to Australia.
Yeah.
And so there's perhaps a bias there, but no disrespect intended to the European community. But I always thought that if I was going to raise children, I would go back to Australia. But other than that, if that hadn't been the case, if I hadn't planned on having kids, I would probably still be in the UK and Europe today. But to answer your question, even though I'm in Australia, the evolution of things like Zoom and the like, one of the very few positives of COVID is that people have become much more comfortable now with doing remote work. And don't get me wrong, I'm not a super fan of it.
Yeah.
I love being face to face with people, but at least there is that backup now. So I've managed to survive, so to speak, living in Australia and dealing with customers all over the world. And we seem to be, getting some success.
I mean, there's more trust since Corona, so everyone is able to trust you more because there's no other way to be that, right? So that's great. So you typically being in a plane for most of the time, right? So if I just see your Twitter timeline, I was always seeing the exotic places of the world. So I'm just traveling around the world and come from conference to conference to conference. So basically, I was just guessing: are you still living in Australia, or you're just having your washing machine there to just make a hop before getting to the next conference?
Well, I think it's fair to say that one's Twitter persona is perhaps not necessarily one's real life persona.
Oh.
And so I've had a lot of people say to me, do you spend all your time traveling? This is in the pre-COVID time frame. And the reality was, no, I used to spend probably at most maybe 30% of my time traveling, not even that. But of course, the other 70%, I'm generally not tweeting, I'm at home today. I'm washing my clothes today. I'm doing the dishes today. I'm running after my children, today. That's not the most exciting Twitter.
This is on Instagram, right? So this is not
right.
Twitter. Yeah,
that's elsewhere. That's right. Yeah. Check my TikTok.
Oh yeah, we will record TikToks after this meeting. Didn't we say that?
But yeah, so it is true that people get an artificial view of the amount of travel I do. But I must admit, one of the things that I noticed when COVID came along is there's the old saying, you don't realize what you've lost until it's taken away from you.
Yeah.
And certainly being a remote worker with Oracle, even before COVID, I was a remote worker. I worked from home 5 days a week. And so for me, it wasn't necessarily the travel. It was the destination. Mm-hmm. Because for me, to actually interact with other people generally meant traveling. Mm-hmm. Because if I went to the Oracle Perth office, then most of the people in the Perth office are sales consultants. They're out on site. And therefore, the only time I really got to interact with other people was either customer visits in the local area in Perth or to travel to events and educate people and speak at conferences. So this is very much a selfish thing. People say, thanks for coming to this conference. I never want to let on to them that this is all about me. This is my way of actually being a social person, being an active member of the community. So without it, I generally would struggle.
Yeah, I once saw your presentation, so I'm very looking forward to see your talk on this conference. The presentation you did, I think it was in Bonn a few years ago. It was pre-COVID, right? And there was so much love and so precise stuff. Like you had just a black screen with the corners around it, like a border around it to see if it's fit. And there was so many slides. I don't know how many 100 slides you had prepared for like a 45-minute talk. And I was guessing, how does he even do that in this time? And then you went through the slides, your presentation, and it was not in a hurry or something like that. So I was guessing that you might have so much time to put in those presentations to present it like this. So how much time do you really spend on preparing for those conferences we talk about?
Well, that's a good question. I've got better at it. Certainly when I adopted my particular style of presenting earlier on, it took a long time to produce that content. And it's an interesting one. Someone asked me once this similar question, and I said probably a good estimate, and I don't know empirically how accurate this is, but I would generally say over the course of a talk, I think people should budget an hour per slide. Mm-hmm. So for me, if I do a 200 slide talk, I think not the writing is easy, but the actual preparation to have a talk ready for 200 slides is about 200 hours, mm-hmm. which is about a week and a half, maybe 2 weeks. And I actually don't think that's too bad. And I think the reason I like that sort of metric is, and I'm actually doing a talk on public speaking tomorrow morning. Oh. Not that I'm plugging it. By the time this podcast goes out, I think that time will be gone. But I think if you don't put in that amount of effort, then really you're being unfair to the audience. Because as we said, I get paid to be here. I'm paid to come to this conference. It's a joyful thing for me, and someone's paying me a salary to do it at the same time. Mm-hmm. What is there else to ask for? But the audience members, they're giving up their time. They're actually giving up their time to hear you speak. And so to sit there and not put in the ultimate effort to give them something that will be rewarding for them is, I find, just almost offensive.
Mm-hmm.
And it's one of those things where, don't get me wrong, there are sometimes, due to time constraints, pressure constraints, budget constraints, that the content you give an audience is perhaps not as good as you'd like it to be. But ideally for me, I always try and minimize those occurrences. For me, it's like, these people have given up so much of themselves to sit in an audience and prepared to be spoken to. Then you should reward them with effort. So that's my view.
So just to switch the perspective is a great way to prepare a presentation, not to just only try to do your best to present something, just to think about the people who are watching you, that they need to be catched with the content, right? So that's a great view. I try to get me to this 200 slides and 1 hour per slide. I don't know. So if you're speaking about 1.5 weeks, you don't do it on full time, right? So how do you manage to get this time into these presentations during your customer success work you do usually?
As I mentioned, I have a lot of flexibility and plenty of autonomy. And I should give a shout out to my manager, Mike Hitchfer at Oracle, who's very much, he says, as long as you're getting the work done, if you have any problems, come see me. Otherwise, do what you need to do. So he's great in terms of giving me that autonomy and flexibility. And so I try and manage my own time. And like everyone, most of the time you have plenty of time to prepare for a conference because you know early on that you've been accepted for a paper. So normally there's plenty of time, but like all human beings, you waste the first half of that time. He's like, I must get round to starting that presentation. And then it gets a bit frantic. But I generally try to allocate time in my day on, there are some things that I have to do and some things that I have a bit of flexibility on. So I'm lucky in the sense that when I look after the Ask Tom website, that I can occasionally skip a day, and that's not going to kill the website. There's plenty of content out there for people to see. Similarly, if I'm going to customers, then that's not something I do every single day. It's intermittent. And so the rest of the time I'll spend on, I just view the term as called building content. Now that might be slide content for presentations, it might be video, it might be blogs, etc. But for me, it's all just the same thing. It's building content. And ultimately then it's just a case of me being able to schedule that time intelligently. I constantly fail at that. So occasionally, a good example is before DOAG, the 2 weeks before DOAG, most of the content was built, after the children had gone to bed, sort of up late at night, saying, I should have started this 3 months ago, but that's how things work out.
Yeah, we already had an episode of Devs on Tape a few months ago where we're just talking about procrastination and how to avoid it. We are not that successful until now, but we hope some listeners are. So you're just pushing everything forward, and this is not necessary right now. I have plenty of time, and then like 1 week before the conference, you're just preparing everything, right?
I feel that most of my technical life and experience will serve as a lesson to others to things to avoid in your life.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so you mentioned different social media stuff you're doing. So I was just remembering the nice setups you did for your YouTube videos, like toilet paper in the background. And this is something I just recognized from a few years ago, I think. So you have like, how many followers do you have on YouTube? It's a long time ago. I checked that.
I think, and if I'm artificially inflating this, I apologize, but I learned a long time ago, I learned an important lesson by watching other YouTube videos of people who are successful creators, not necessarily in the tech space, is they said, don't obsess over things like the followers, the views and stuff like that, because otherwise you'll start making content that chases that. And a good example is that I think one of the most popular videos on my own channel is how to install the Oracle database. And so I think that was installing 12C back in the day when I first did that video. And when it got plenty of views, my first thought was, I'll do a 12.2 installation and a 19C installation,
just to get
an 18C installation, because people love installation videos. And I thought, that's all well and good, but does it really serve? It serves my interest. I'll be happy I get all these thousands of views, but does it really actually benefit the community? And the answer to that is no. But in terms of how I think I've got somewhere in the vicinity of 9,000 subscribers to my YouTube channel, somewhere in that vicinity. It could be less, could be more, but I do my best not to check, because it's what do they call it? They call it clout chasing. If you're chasing for clout, And I just don't. I had a podcast, funny enough, recently where I was the podcast host, interviewing an Oracle intern who has a very large number of followers on Twitter already. And we were discussing about follower counts and stuff. And she made a very good point. And she said, it's not the follower count, it's the count of followers that count. And so, I view a genuine follower count on any social media platform as the people you could reach out to and say, hey, do you want to get a drink? Do you want to get a coffee? Hey, I'm having a bad time. Can you help me out? And out of the 9,000 YouTube subscribers, I'm sure there is 9,000 that would do that. There's a much smaller number, and they're the people that really count. So it's not the count of followers, it's the followers that count. So.
Yeah, correct. So are you checking your comments on a regular basis? I think there might be many tech questions under your videos, right? So I try to do exactly what you did, but I have an aura like XYZ.
It's funny, I generally do try to respond to YouTube comments because in effect, that's a very similar kind of platform to Ask Tom, in the sense that people they're halfway through something and then they've hit some sort of roadblock. And even in my videos, they might be following, most of my videos have an equivalent script that they could run as well in either in my Git repo or on LiveSQL. And so often they'll follow that link and they'll say, I'm trying to run this demo that you did, but I'm getting this problem. And sometimes that's because they're on the wrong version or they've just made a typo, etc. But those kind of comments, which are really just follow-up questions, I'll always endeavor to answer. I have to say I'm not particularly timely because, once again, you don't want to spend your day looking at YouTube comments.
Yeah, under your own videos, right? Just watch every day, you watch your own videos and then you look at the comments, right?
And so, but if it's question and answer, then I'll try help out. One thing I have discovered on all social media platforms is for every 5 valid comments, there'll be 5 comments which are really, here's a link to something you could buy. Yeah. Here's a link to something that we could sell you. Here's a link to some ransomware that we're trying to install on your machine. So all those platforms are reasonably good at filtering that out, but some always creeps through. Same on Ask Tom. On Ask Tom, we get a lot of comments. I use the term in sort of inverted commas. The comments are, oh, thanks for this post. By the way, have you ever thought about getting this credit card? And so we have to go through and clean them up as well.
So you're doing it by hand, or do you have any automated process to do so? So you don't have to answer if we are able to circumvent it and make advertisements for our podcast on your platform. So how do you get rid of those comments?
On Ask Tom at the moment, this is something fairly new to Ask Tom. Only in the last probably 12 months we've started getting spam, and I view that as a positive thing, because you only get spammed if people think that's a platform that's popular and that people will see their spam.
That's a very optimistic way of thinking about this. Yeah.
And so at the moment, we're dealing with it manually. And we have some simple tools in Ask Tom where literally we just see the comment and we just literally click a button and it's gone. That obviously won't scale if we start getting floods of spam. But at the moment, it's fairly manageable. But it's weird. I view spam as a good problem to have. It's, what do they call it? A success crisis.
We will see if Ask Tom is growing faster and faster and you get really big spam amounts. And then I ask you again if it's great to have spam, right? So until we see no reCAPTCHA thing under a comment input field, so I don't have any worries about that. Yeah, so you said you have I will not repeat the number of followers you have on YouTube, because in case of you have 50,000 followers, and we have to cut it out in front of it, right? So you are doing Twitter, right? You're doing YouTube. What else do you do?
I do a blog.
Oh yeah.
While we're on the podcast, I do some shameless self-promotion. So head over to connor-mcdonald.com.
We are asking for that, and we put that in the show notes. This is something we have to say in the podcast every single episode, that they have to show to look into the show notes to see all the links to your accounts, right? So,
well, what I'll do is I'll save you some effort and save your listeners some effort, hopefully as well. There's a website called Linktree, which is linktr.ee. If you go to Linktree/Connor, that just brings up a link of all my links.
Oh, right.
So Linktree/Connor will get you my blog, my YouTube channel, my GitHub repo, Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, email, etc., etc. So in terms of channels I use, I have a YouTube channel, I have a blog. I actually have started dabbling in TikTok.
Oh,
happy to talk about why. But I've now got TikTok as well. Obviously, I'm fairly active on Twitter. And they're probably the main social media channels I'm active on. So I try to think, and I have a podcast. So if you go to the Spoken Nerd, as opposed to the Spoken Word, you can get that. How do the podcasters say it? Wherever you find your podcasts, you can get it there. So it's on Apple, Spotify, etc.
Yeah, we have a similar service where we are putting up our stuff. So yeah, we don't have we have a YouTube channel, right? So our videos are also our podcasts are also uploaded to YouTube, but there's just only the cover and a waveform.
Yeah, something like a voice line or so.
Yeah.
Okay. I've done a couple of podcast episodes, much like we're sitting here, but we have a camera on as well. Mm-hmm. So then I'll publish them on my podcast platform, but also as a video, which normally works well, but it's hard to find guests that are happy to be videoed.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there might be a reason why we have chosen the podcast platform to do so, because we don't have the time and don't have the, is it called courage? No, it is called the confidence to be on video or the same. But I mean, we could think about doing the same thing, like just recording our faces in the podcast and don't have a whole film production of a podcast studio. So I mean, there's nothing special to see right now in this room besides you. I think there's right. So there are 3 people in the room with headphones on and some cables on the table. But yeah, great. So I will subscribe to your podcast too, and we might do some cross promotion, because I guess you already have more listeners than we have until now. But yeah, we have to speak English again, so we'll see if we can do that. Yeah, so we might have a little switch over back to the Oracle database, which is your home basically, right? So we have this question in our mind for our followers or for our listeners of the podcast. If there's someone who wants to start with databases right now, so like maybe from a school, back from school, is it called like that? Or trying the first job and being asked, which database would you use to solve this problem? How would be the procedure you would suggest to go then?
It's funny, if you'd asked me that 10 years ago, or perhaps even longer, because I used to do talks on, I still have a talk called Successful Application Development with Oracle, but it could be with any database. And one of the things I used to say was, go to the standard documentation set. There's a book in there called The Concepts Guide. Read that cover to cover. If you do that, you literally know more than most experienced Oracle professionals out there, even if you're brand new, because it talks about all the structures and how things are important, what things not to avoid, etc., etc. And that advice, don't get me wrong, is still totally valid, but no one's going to do that. Mm-hmm. The days of people picking up a book, a technical book, and reading it cover to cover seem to have evaporated, which I lament, but I'm also a realist. The world has changed and people don't do that anymore. And so as a result, my view is, how can we get close to that experience, but in a more modern way? And the best way of describing modern way is, I think the modern technical developer coming out of a college is looking for bite-sized pieces. They're looking for, I have a problem, how do I solve this one particular problem today? Mm. And for them, that'll be Stack Overflow, it'll be a TikTok, it'll be a 30-second video, it'll be the first paragraph of a blog post, because God forbid they're not going to read it end to end.
Yeah.
And as much as I could be cynical and old and a dinosaur and say, that's not how it should be, etc., the reality is our job, in fact, my job in particular, is to cater to how people are consuming information. And that's, as I said, that's one of the reasons I've started dabbling in TikTok, is the reality is people are looking for bite-sized chunks to solve small problems. Whether you're using Oracle or any other database technology, if someone's looking for a bigger picture answer to that question, I would put on my relational database bias hat and say, whatever database platform you're planning on using, before you think about the database platform, I think the one thing that everyone would be very wise to invest time in is SQL. And I'd love to say that SQL on Oracle is the only way to go, but I'm a realist. The reality is people use SQL Server, people use Postgres, people use all sorts of environments. But it's funny how every year people say the SQL language is a legacy of a bygone era and will die out. And those same people that say it the following year saying, oh, we build product X, and guess what? We're launching a new SQL interface to our product. SQL is the ultimate stayer, the ultimate staying power. And no matter what happens, I've yet to see any product that has not offered a SQL as an interface that has really thrived. Probably the only one I could think of offhand would be something like Mongo. But even Mongo, when you look at its JSON query language, it has a lot of the history of SQL in it. It just looks like a JSON format of a SQL expression. So the same rules apply. It's a language for data access where you're not actually specifying how to do the data access. You're simply saying, this is what I need. Please, database, go work out how to best do it. So my advice for anyone coming out of an education institution is, first and foremost, learn SQL. And then the platform doesn't really matter. And don't get me wrong, inside Oracle, we'll be happy to tell people that, well, it's going to be very hard to change from SQL Server SQL to Oracle SQL. And the same people in SQL Server will be saying it'll be very hard to change from Oracle SQL to Microsoft SQL. And the same people at Postgres will be saying the same. But the reality is the SQL dialects are all fairly similar. The architecture underneath it is quite different. And me putting my Oracle hat on, I would say that ours is the best. But rest assured, other vendors will say theirs the best. That's a debate for another day. But for starters, if you learn SQL as a young graduate out of university, you're well on the way to being successful with any database. And in particular, the only bias I will put on that is I think the world is moving back to relational database. For a while there, document databases were the absolute be all and end all. Everyone said these are going to cast aside the relational database technologies. Relational databases are like dinosaurs in the whatever era it was. NoSQL is the meteor that's come and going to wipe them out. And all I've seen in the last 5 years is relational databases simply grow and grow and grow in terms of their demand. Part of that is the SQL language, but also I think people have suddenly realized that it's not just about storing data, it's being able to intelligently access data, intelligently manipulate data. So for the young developer, to return to that answer, it's learn SQL first. And if you learn a relational database, I think you can't go wrong. And then it's my job and other people like my role, anyone in the educational role, it's our jobs to then come up with ways to let them learn SQL and relational database in little bite-sized formats, bite-sized chunks, no matter how we feel that's a frustrating way to go for us, because we're from that legacy of sit down, do a long course, do a lot of reading, etc.
Reading books, right?
Yeah. It's not our right to tell them how they should be consuming information. I can't tell my own children, you shouldn't be spending time on Snapchat or TikTok, whatever, because that is the medium by which they will learn things. And I think we have to cater to that.
So, and they're watching your videos, right? And start using Oracle databases.
Well, they watch my videos because they're forced to.
Oh, right.
Yeah. When I publish a video, I said, boys, start clicking the view count.
Yeah, then we'll be back at the follower count.
Make sure you subscribe. No, my boys don't have a great deal of interest. To their credit, every time I publish a video, they'll often put some random comment in saying, yes, I really enjoyed this video, and I can tell I can tell it's them because it's such a banal comment.
Yeah.
But yeah, good on them for being loyal to the they
At least they are not selling credit cards on your comments, right? So you have some extra income. So maybe this is another format. So you said that they can consume, so everyone can consume all the different mediums, right? Like TikTok, short videos on YouTube, long videos on YouTube, and everything else. But what is necessary then would be like a path they can walk through. Like you said, learn SQL. After that, learn a relational database, right? But then they need a path to walk on. If you read a book, you have the strict order. You can read it from cover to cover, right? And then you know everything based on each other. So if I start typing in SQL on YouTube, I have so many hours to watch videos and see whatever. I don't have the feeling that I would get everything I need, right? Because there's no structure like in a book. Besides, I'm watching tutorials or something like that. So I need something to lead on. Maybe this is another format for your YouTube channel, Connor Reads. So you're sitting there, 30-minute bite-sized chunks where you just read a book in 30 seconds, right? That might be a good way for your channel.
Well, it's interesting, like, I'm not going to call you an old dinosaur because I'm far older than you, but I honestly view that I think the younger generation aren't particularly interested in the path. And I'm with you. I find that distressing. However, I honestly don't think they are. When I was interviewing an Oracle intern on my own podcast recently, I was asking her, I said, how do you navigate? She was doing a SQL course at uni in their current coursework. And I said, how did you get into, tackling problems? And not that I want to put, my own voice in her head, but trying to paraphrase, it was very much about, I start with a task at hand and I'm totally in the dark. And so I'll Google or find a TikTok or find a YouTube or find a blog about how to write my first SQL statement. And then I'll write the first keyword. And then that's task 1 is complete. I've satisfied that problem. Now I'm on to task 2. What do I do now? Oh, okay, now I need to list the columns. Okay, so task 2 is, how do I find the columns? And the whole thing was simply about, how do I overcome solely the next hurdle? Nothing else. And I find that sad. It's just because it's just not the way I think that technology should be learned. But I think that's the reality of the world. I think the reality is solve the next task only and then move on from there. And I think that you can see from the popularity of things like Stack Overflow that people are so very much focused in the minute, in the small details. How do I get over this hump? And everything else doesn't matter. And I could even be a bit flippant and say, you look at even the way we develop applications nowadays, is that not that Agile was ever meant to be this, but people often take the Agile methodology and bastardize it or manipulate it to be, I shouldn't think about the future. I should only think about the next iteration, the next sprint, the next bit of work. The people that built Agile never meant it to be that way. They said, yes, we tackle work in bite-sized chunks, but we always have a focus on the bigger picture. But bigger picture is hard. And so people dismiss that. People sort of, say, yep, no, all I have to worry about is the next sprint. And so I think even the way we build applications nowadays has become just solve the next hurdle, just get over the next hurdle. And I think that's fraught with problems and fraught with danger. And I think I've worked on enough Agile projects that have failed because they've lost sight of the bigger picture. And I worry about this generation of developers coming out who are focused on just solve the next problem. Having said that, which sounds all gloom and doom, is I worked at a project where this is before I joined Oracle, with a group of very young developers who had never used Oracle, and many of them had never used a database. And they just jumped in. This was a 100% Oracle solution they were building in a very high transaction environment, so thousands of transactions per second. So they had to get it exactly right. And these people knew nothing about Oracle, nothing about database. And they just charged on in this same mindset. Okay, learn how to write a SQL statement. Okay, learn how to write an insert. Okay, and let's build an application. And things weren't working. Things weren't going at all well. But to their credit, they were as dismissive as I was of that approach. That approach also makes people very keen to ask questions, very keen to reach out for help, and very keen to struggle on their own, fail, and then say, okay, how do I get myself out of the mess? And so to their credit, over the 3 years I was on this project, they went from people who were totally ignorant of Oracle technology and database technology to people that were not just very skilled in it, but big fans of it and big fans of their wins. We had something which a lot of latency, a lot of performance problems, but I re-architected it to do this. I read about this, I learned this, and I refactored it to do this. And now it runs, rather than 60 seconds, it runs in half a second. And so I think as I said, as distressed as I am about people taking these very near-term view approaches to development, there will be plenty of failures and plenty of crashes and plenty of problems. But I think that same approach will help them navigate their way out of that. And I think it's a bit maybe pretentious of us as old school technicians to say, look, if you listen to us, you won't have those failures and crashes. Whereas if we look back at our own careers, I think we all have them. Now that we've navigated our way through them, we feel entitled to say, look, we can help you avoid that. But I don't think these people want to avoid it. I think they want to basically follow that rocky path because they know that that's how they'll gain their expertise. And I think it sounds parental. Our job is just to make sure they don't cut themselves too badly.
Yeah, sure. I mean, to besides getting away from the dinosaur you called me earlier, so I can really say that this learning by doing thing is definitely the way I went back then, because I mean, you can read a book and you can use 10% if your job or your task or your problem you try to solve is in this 10% of the book, or even in this book, and you just need the single part and you know everything of it. So, but if you have just to tackle the problems or the task you have at that time, you might be the specialist for exactly that. So maybe your tasks and your work and what you have to do is forming your career and it's forming your skill set, right? So if you're reading books and watching every video to have all the knowledge, you might just need it for the next crash, but it's not sure that you exactly know what's happening there. You might having a easier access to where to find the solution, and you don't make that silly problems or silly mistakes you're doing if you're a beginner, right? But I think the learning by doing thing is you have a problem, you find a solution on YouTube, on Stack Overflow, and the next time you have this issue, you will be at the same place to watch again and copy paste again, or you just have it in your mind because you already made that. So this is something I was seeing when I talked to my father, how he learned all the stuff. I mean, they had plenty of learning by doing back then, but they read books and books and books, exactly that. And I will not say that I never read a book before, but if you have like the book of Stephen Feuerstein, for example, I don't know if anyone who's saying that it read from cover to cover is saying it truthfully. I don't exactly think.
And to cycle that back to this conference and DOAG and user groups is, I think one of the benefits is for those people that do have this approach of stumble, ask for help, stumble, reach out to things, Stack Overflow, etc. That naturally will start to build them a community. Whereas if I followed my own advice and just sat there and read the concepts manual, then I might shortcut myself or fast track myself to being more knowledgeable. But in that process, I've never spoken to anyone else. And if I do the opposite, which is just solve little problems and not think of the big picture, every time I have a little problem, I'm probably going to have to either solve it for myself, which is fine, or I'm going to have to reach out somewhere. It might be Twitter, it might be Stack Overflow, it might be on an email group, etc. But even though it's not my intention, I'm starting to build a community of people. And ultimately, that's what leads to successful things like user groups. And so as much as I disdain it, I think it's a good idea that people do these little tiny bite-sized chunks, because what will happen is they'll start build communities, and therefore you end up with prosperous organizations such as DOAG, UKOG, etc. I think the long-term future of such groups depends on these younger generations being prepared to reach out to communities. The Oracle intern I interviewed has over 40,000 Twitter followers just by being someone who constantly reaches out to Twitter to say, hey, I'm doing this, am I doing it right, etc. And I think that's a good lesson for a lot of people, is that you'll build a community, and I think then we all win.
So talking about communities, so you already mentioned Ask Tom, right? Can you tell us more about Ask Tom? What do you do there? What is the goal of the platform? And why is it the perfect place to go if you have a question around Oracle products?
Ask Tom started off back in the day with Tom Kite, who was a famous Oracle person from many years gone by. And when he started the site, he was currently, like a lot of us were, we were answering questions on public forums. And what would happen is there was no control over that. You had to sort of pick and choose your questions. And if you wanted to get a bit more, a closer relationship with anyone asking questions, if you gave them your email address, then the next day there's 100 emails in your inbox, and you have to tackle them. So Tom thought he'd build a little simple website such that he would have more control over when the questions come in and which questions he chose to answer. And Tom did that for 14 years. It's one of the very first ever Apex sites. In fact, it actually was built before Apex was built. It was built in the sort of the language that Apex is built in, and then got migrated to Apex at a later date. But yeah, Ask Tom went live in May 2000. So it's been around for a long time. When Tom retired in 2015, and the site had been dormant for a little while, we kickstarted it again. Chris Saxon and myself started answering questions. And so to people that are unfamiliar with Ask Tom, it used to be Ask Tom for Ask Tom Kite. Now it's Ask TOM for Ask the Oracle Mentors. We wanted to keep the name, but obviously rebrand it, so to speak, to reflect what it is.
I didn't know that. Yeah.
So we call ourselves Ask the Oracle Mentors, which is the same acronym. And really, it's for anyone who's currently using the Oracle products or considering using the Oracle products that are database focused, because Chris and I's expertise is in the database world. We encourage people to ask questions there and interact with us there. You could argue that, well, why wouldn't you just use Stack Overflow? And we don't try to compete with Stack Overflow. We encourage people. We often if we find an answer on Stack Overflow, we'll say, well, there's some activity over here. Go check out that as well. But one of the things in Stack Overflow is what I would call a free-for-all. For every person that asks a question, anyone can answer a question. And that's why Stack Overflow uses a voting system, because they're using the community to come up with an idea for what they think are good answers versus not good answers. We try to offer a different model, which is if you're an existing user of Oracle products, then if Chris and I can't answer that question, then we know inside Oracle the person that looks after that exact product, and we can get hopefully the best answer possible. And don't get me wrong, sometimes we get it wrong. Chris and I are only human, but we set up a site saying that if you have a question that you want to actually ask Oracle people, I don't want to fashion an answer from the community. I want to get an answer from the people that actually own the product. Then that's why we put Ask Tom there. And that's why we don't see ourselves as a competitor to Stack Overflow. We're offering a different kind of service. And for the same reason, we often see questions that have come into Ask Tom asked the same day on Stack Overflow, because people want to get both sort of points of view. And that's not, we're not going to go, oh, well, you should, don't waste our time because you put it on Stack Overflow. We like people to ask questions in many places because they'll get a much more rounded view of the answer.
Yeah. Is there any goal for Ask Tom for the future you already have in your mind? Or is it just a successful platform where all the questions are getting answers and it should just run like it's running now?
We're constantly looking at ways to improve Ask Tom. And one of the things that we find is when people come to Ask Tom, they generally get via Google. They'll do a Google search. They hit a question that we've answered over the past 20 years. One of the things we do find is if that question doesn't exactly answer their question, they'll go back to Google, because inside Ask Tom, we probably don't have an excellent cross-reference. If here's a question, here's an answer that's possibly similar. So we're doing some work on Ask Tom to come up with some tagging and some metadata to try and make the site more benefit to users, such that if they don't find the exact answer they want, then hopefully with a couple more clicks, they'll be able to get to an answer that's maybe more suitable for them. So we're putting work in those lines. The other one is we have a partnering site to Ask Tom called the Dev Gym, which was originally built by Stephen Feuerstein, but it's now run by Chris Saxon, which is a different thing for people who are more starting out on their Oracle career. We do things like classes and quizzes and workouts, and it's more of an educational site. And at the moment, those two sites pretty much sit separately. It's easy to click between them, but they offer sort of two different things. We'd like to get to a stage where someone might click on, say, something relating to Apex, and if we can see by the metadata that question is probably what we call a newbie question, someone saying, how do I create a classic report? Then we're hoping to have some metadata which will say, okay, here's your answer to your question, but by the way, here's a link to a class on that you can get in the Dev Gym. So a bit of cross-pollination, because some people ask questions because they're currently learning something. And so it'd be nice to say, oh, you're learning Apex. Go here. Oh, you're learning Pure SQL. Here's a free course. It sounds weird for an Oracle person to be saying we're investing a lot of time into creating more and more free stuff for our users. And people say, oh, that sounds weird. But that's probably a reflection of how Oracle is also remodeling itself as a company.
It is basically everything all the other competitive... the challenging companies who are next to Oracle are doing right now. So if Oracle doesn't do it, it would be worse. But it was a great wording to say, oh, this is your answer. You might see there's a course about that. It's basically better than if you're just pasting automatically a link under this question. Here are the Apex basics. Just click on it, learn it, and then come back, ask a question again.
On that topic, one of the things that irks me, one of the things that annoys me more than anything else, whether it's on Ask Tom, Stack Overflow, Oracle forums, any forums, is when someone asks a question and the answer that comes back from someone in the community is RTFM, read the manual. Because I find that incredibly judgmental. Because, and don't get me wrong, we do a lot of questions at Ask Tom, and sometimes I'm going, you see a question, you're going, man, I know exactly in the manual where that answer is, and we'll often send them the link. But that's different to saying you should have read the manual, because then you're judging someone. You're saying, I don't believe that you actually put in the effort. And even if they didn't, even if someone was lazy, even if someone just couldn't be bothered, what right do we have to say, I'm going to judge you for that. And so one of the things that we have in Ask Tom is Chris and I have a policy of we will never say RTFM. We might say, oh, here's a link in the docs where it answers that question. But we'll give them the link. Mm-hmm. And nothing annoys me more than people say RTFM because they spent their own time just to down someone, just to make someone feel worse about themselves.
Yeah, and maybe just push themselves up, right? So if they're saying read the manual, we might have to put the explicit sign on the episode if we're trying to curse right now. So we didn't, I don't know, but yeah. So it's a better way to not judge. It's correct. So I was trying to see in our usual categories we are usually doing in the end of our podcast. We have a couple of questions, and because of the spontaneous recording right now, you didn't even see them before. Okay. So the first question would be, if you could undo a technical trend from the last years, which trend would you undo? It can be basically everything, right? It doesn't have to do anything with our jobs or our environment. It could be like an electric car or just...
I would undo smart devices in the home. Things like the Alexas, the Googles, etc., etc. Simply because it's not the devices per se. It's the mistake we made 20 years ago. And that mistake was that we'll build services for free. And in order to pay for those services, we'll use advertising. Mm-hmm. If at the very start of things, whether it was Facebook, email, etc., the whole model was, we're going to give you email, whether it's Yahoo, Gmail, whatever, but you pay $1 a month for that. Mm-hmm. That's what you have to do. There are no free services. If you want a service, everything has to be paid for. Then the concept of advertising being the way that these things are paid for, then that this whole model would have disappeared. But I think the quintessential version of that is smart devices in the home, because that bothers me in the sense that, and maybe this is coming from a parent, is I don't want my children being in a place where what they say could perhaps have a material impact on the way they live their lives later. And people say it would never happen, etc. But I don't want my children mucking around saying things that may be considered almost downright illegal, because children yelling around the house, I'm going to chop you up with an axe, whatever. And then because the logical extension of where we are today is that in 10 years time, one of my children's going for a job and they say, well, our records here indicate that you're susceptible to aggressive behavior, and we picked that up from our Alexa device when you were 11 years old.
You might have guessed that because we just suggested access on Amazon the day after he told you that, right? Yeah. Right. Great question. So this is a new one for us. So maybe, Carol, do you have the next question?
Of course. I would like to know something more personal. Would you get embarrassed if you would show us your screen time on your iPhone?
I don't have an iPhone. I have an Android phone.
So you won't not be embarrassed because Android doesn't have that feature to have that.
That's why I have an Android. No, I spend very little time on my phone, to be honest. Oh. And when I say very little, I'm not saying a small amount of time, but I think that's because I'm old school. At home, I sit in front of my computer most of the day, and so whenever something comes up, it's on my screen. It's not on my phone. So. That's probably a generational thing. My children, their phone is super glued to their hand. But yeah, I don't spend a lot of time on the phone, but simply because at a convenience, in the sense that I'm sitting in front of my computer most of the day. My dining table is my work station. So even when I go to my kitchen and get some food, I come back and I start eating, and there's the keyboard right there, and the mouse is right there, and the screen is right in front of me. So in terms of screen time, yes, it's a lot. I get up in the morning normally about 6. I'll probably walk the dog, feed the dog. I'll sit down about 7 in the morning and the screen goes on. And if I'm not careful, I could easily not get up until mid-afternoon. And then my hips and my knees remind me that I should have got up about 6 hours ago. Yeah. My problem is I'm just addicted to the tech. Mm-hmm. And I would love to paint some pretty picture in the fact that, I spend the whole day just solely looking at Oracle database tech. That's not true. Mm-hmm. But I do my job. I do some Ask Tom. I'll watch a couple of YouTube videos often to see what the successful creators are doing to come up with techniques, to make my own videos. But then, I'll read the news, etc. But it's always done all on screen. And so, it's a problem I have in the sense that I could easily go from 7 a.m. till 7 p.m. with minimal get-ups. And then I'll go to bed going, this was a mistake. This is why your eyes are hurting. This is why your partner's looking at you going, have you been crying? I go, no, I just forgot to blink for the last 12 hours. So in my defense, I'll say, yes, my phone screen time is very, very small.
Yeah.
My monitor time is way, way too much.
So you're saying that this is a problem for you. To extend this question, did you try to do something to avoid that? Do you have some timer on your table to say, just stand up and use a standing table, for example? Or maybe...
I've often entertained the idea of a standing table or all sorts of techniques to get me away from the desk. Most of them have been unsuccessful due to a just total lack of self-discipline. One of the best things I did, and this wasn't the intention, but one of the best things I did when COVID came along was I got a dog. Mm-hmm. And I got a dog because my travel obviously dropped to zero. And I thought this is a good time to get a dog because I always worried about if I was traveling so much, how would I deal with having a dog? It would be very unfair to a dog to have it boarding or going to a kennel, etc. So I bought a dog to keep me company during COVID. And it sounds weird, but it was perhaps the biggest productivity boost I got for some time because dogs don't understand technology. So every hour, my dog comes to the table and says, I would like some attention. Mm-hmm. And just gives you a little nudge, wants a snack, wants a pat, wants a cuddle. Or maybe twice a day it says, look, I'm fed up with this. I want to walk. And originally when that started happening, I was like, oh, this is a pain. I'm 30 minutes in the morning walking my dog, 30 minutes in the afternoon walking my dog. This is costing me an hour of my job time. But what I found was it actually made me far better at my job because it clears your mind. It forces you to stop what you're doing and you come back much more, rather than just tapping away slowly on the keyboard and sort of just going through the drudgery of the day, you come back and you're like, okay, let's get going. And you're into the next thing, whether it's Ask Tom or making a video or whatever. So thankfully, my dog doesn't understand English and doesn't realize that I should thank him a lot for being present. But I was surprised, but he's been a very good productivity boost. I'd recommend a dog for anyone.
So for every listener without a dog, you can walk 30 minutes in the morning outside without a dog. It works. I tried that for a couple of days.
And that's the joy of a dog. A dog forces you. It's not an option. It's not like you can't just go, well, we're not doing it today. You have to clean your house if you don't do it, right? Exactly.
All right. So another private question would be, are you surrounded by geeks, like your private surroundings? Are there many people addicted to tech? Not addicted, maybe.
Because I work from home, I spend most of the time alone. Obviously, my community when I travel are all geeks. We're all here at this conference, and generally we're all IT geeks. But in terms of around me, interesting. Both my children don't have a strong fascination with tech. They use their phones like every other teenager does, but they don't have an interest in getting into technology. One of my boys is a gamer, so he would live on the computer if I allowed him to. But unfortunately, he's got a father who's IT literate, which obviously means things like the router automatically disables his access after a certain amount of time and stuff like that. So he's not happy that I'm in IT. He would much rather it be me being a dumb IT person. My partner, Genevieve, is a business intelligence analyst. So she's familiar with SQL, familiar with the Oracle database. I always know how her SQL is going if I get a phone call late in the afternoon, when she's leaving work. And I was like, I'm leaving work now. I'm on my way home. There better be a gin and tonic waiting when I get there. That's when I know her SQL hasn't worked out so well during the day. But other than that, there's not a lot of tech around me besides my partner Genevieve.
But it's very close to you, so there are not many topics to talk about after work and drinking a gin tonic. There may be some secret statements in your talks, right?
It's funny, like every person that uses a database of any technology, whether it's Oracle or otherwise, the customers of the product often have some frustrations. And so it's sometimes my job to just sit back and allow those frustrations to be vented, and I just absorb them. And then it's not my job to go, well, it sounds like you did it wrong. I never go with that. I always just go, yes, that's right. It's the product that's the problem. It's definitely our fault.
Yeah.
That's the safe way.
All right. I will write that down. All right. So the following question.
Yeah, I would like to ask a question about how you consume media. For example, how do you handle the growing materials like YouTube videos, Twitter posts, blog posts, etc., etc.?
I consider myself lucky in the sense that part of that is my job, and as a result, I can come up with some ideas for scheduling that. And it's a tactic I wish my children would learn, because they would simply surf their phones all day long and look at nonsense. And it's an easy trap to fall into. When I started producing content for TikTok, my first thing was, well, I'll have a look at TikTok and see what people are putting on TikTok. And maybe it's just my age, but I was just so saddened by the fact that it's a lot of it is just so trivial and of no consequence. But by the same token, I could find myself easily just scrolling through it. And because none of it grabs just enough of your attention to hold your attention, but there's absolutely no long-lasting impact from it. You know, the moment you scroll forward, someone says, "What did you just look at?" You have no idea. And it's funny how you could see it's so easy. You could think, I have no interest in this, and yet an hour could go by. And that's one of the things I find interesting. But because it's part of my job, what I do is in the morning, I'll normally spend the first part of my morning saying, okay, maybe an hour. An hour will be looking at YouTube, looking at Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, for things that will be related to my job. So Twitter's easy because the people that you follow are obviously generally in the technical community. There's a few others, but generally it's technical community. It's much harder on things like YouTube and TikTok because it's just a smorgasbord of stuff. But often I'll just search for particular hashtags on TikTok, etc., just to see what's out there and maybe see what's missing. Especially TikTok being the most common, the most current one. There's not a lot of tech content on TikTok. Yet when I speak to people who are younger than me, they say that they are already veering. They're moving away from YouTube. YouTube is seen as too lengthy. They're moving away from YouTube to TikTok. They're moving away from YouTube to YouTube Shorts. They're moving away from Instagram to, was it Stories or Reels? One of the two. You know, they're moving to these contents where it's all about short and sharp. And so I think as technical people who produce content, we have to move with them. So as many, I've done just over 500 videos, I think, on my YouTube channel. But the reality is I know that ultimately all of them will become obsolete over time because most of them are over 5 minutes.
So we might see you dancing on TikTok and explaining like an outer join, like dancing in your living room.
Well, it's funny you should say that. Like, one of the things I have noticed is all content creators in the technical space will need to come up with innovative ways to pass on good information. And I make no claim to be a master of that. I'm still trying to learn the trade. But for example, my most recent TikTok was how to get back a dropped table. But it was done with a musical score and my movements were done in time to the music because that's the TikTok way.
Yeah.
But the whole time I was making it, I felt like an idiot. But the reality is that is how we need to. We have to react to the way that people want to consume content. We don't get to decide as much as we'd like to.
So are the short videos on TikTok consuming more of your time than big productions on YouTube? I call them big productions because compared to the TikTok videos.
It's funny how at the moment, I think because I'm unskilled at it, they take longer. It's easy to produce a YouTube video because it's closer to what I do for a living outside YouTube. It's talking to a camera, here's some slides, here's some demos. So it's really just a mirror of what I would do at a conference, but just in a more compact form. TikTok's different. TikTok, for a start, it's not, it's portrait mode. So the video has to be different. It's compact. Most people are going to consume TikTok on their phone. So you can't put a screen dump. You can't put, detailed stuff because none of that is going to be readable on a phone. You've got to come up with ways of teaching people complex technical topics with things that might be just a sentence or two. And so I'm by no means skilled at that yet, and I'm trying to teach myself, which is why I watch occasional TikToks on technology to see what people are doing. But yeah, we'll have to adapt.
We will see it, put it in our show notes, and then we pump up your followers
Definitely.
on TikTok again.
But I'll give you an example. I did a YouTube video recently, a YouTube Shorts video. I can't remember what it was on, but I put it out, and after a week on my YouTube channel, it had, I'm making these numbers up, so don't quote me on them, but they're it's for relativeness. On the YouTube, after a week, it had 500 views. The exact same video on TikTok, after a week, had 5,000 views. And so that's the way the world is going. Is that a good thing? Who knows? But it's funny how TikTok already has that much bigger reach. And if you'd asked me, or I would have thought if you'd asked anyone who uses TikTok regularly, do you go to TikTok for technical learning content? They would laugh you out of the house. But if there's 5,000 people viewing it, then obviously it's being consumed by some people.
Yeah.
Do you get the insight if they watch the video to its end in the back end? So if it's just swiping, see, oh, Connor, swiping.
I have no idea yet. And
Okay.
that's, as I said, I'm still new to TikTok. I'll have to start doing some research because much like the other platforms, I think there are various tiers and stuff that you might need to get into in terms of picking up the full analytics. So
Yeah. So last but not least, the closing question of this podcast episode. Time flies. So if there's one thing you're taking back to Australia from this conference, like not in a physical way or material way.
the beer. I'm taking the beer.
You're taking the beer, right?
And the Nuremberg sausages.
Even if it's the first day of the conference, is there anything you might have in your mind when you're traveling back to Australia?
For me, and I make no intention to demean this conference, but I view it as the same as any event I've been to in the last couple of months, is the joy of face-to-face community. And I think I said at the very start of this podcast, I said, you don't realize what you've lost until someone takes it away from you. And for so many of us, we took being face-to-face at technical events for granted. And we can use the cliche of networking and stuff like that. But ultimately, it's just, humans are a social animal. And I think we didn't realize that strongly enough until we could no longer be social animals. And let's face it, we probably spend, a third of our life in the workplace or working on our jobs. A third of our life sleeping, a third of our life doing other things. But so to not interact with the community about the things you work with is to not be a social animal for 30% of your life. That seems a tragedy. So for me, even people I've not met yet because they're not speaking till tomorrow, I have a euphoria and a joy thinking I cannot wait to see these people again because I haven't seen them for years. And I know them well and we've kept in regular touch, but even so, it's not the same as being with them face to face. And I know for a fact, I've always been a big fan of user groups, even though I work now for Oracle. Before that, I was always generally either a committee member on user groups or help doing some volunteering stuff. Always been a huge fan of user groups. And I know that for the last couple of years, user groups have done it extraordinarily hard. And so the thing I want to take back to Australia is I'll be in touch with our Australian user group, telling them of the success of this event, that user groups can come back from the brink and they can be successful. And so most of the user group events I've seen this year have been running at about 50% of what their normal capacity would be. But I view that as a win because it was zero. And so anyone that can get 50% capacity this year is well on the way to having 100% capacity next year. And as I mentioned earlier, to bring back more things from the podcast, the fact that the younger generation are building their communities, even though they don't intend to, that's going to be the next tapping audience for making our user groups bigger and stronger than they ever were before.
Great words to close this podcast.
Definitely.
Thank you very much, Connor. Thank you, Caro.
It's
Thank
been a
you.
pleasure.
Thank you.